All right. Welcome back to Slocks and Locks. I'm Tim.
And I'm Mello, the podcast where we explore gaming, internet culture, psychology, the systems that shape how people think and behave. An important note here, we do not provide any incorrect foolproof systems on how to win.
Yeah, so today's episode starts with a kind of a simple question. If I showed you, Mello, or anyone for that matter that's listening to this podcast, a slot machine powered by a NASCAR race that happened 20-something years ago, would you call that gambling?
You would say the race was 20 years ago, not the slot machine.
Well, the slot machine could be that too.
But so you're saying the outcome isn't generated by a random number generator like a traditional slot?
Nice. What if it came from a real historical event?
And what if the regulator said that made it something different?
Yeah, so we're diving into one of the most fascinating areas of modern gambling, or gaming, depending on what we want to say. But historical horse racing, NASCAR-powered slot machines, DK replay, virtual horse racing, prediction markets, and the growing world of alternative gaming.
DK replay, that's DraftKings Replay, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Because the biggest innovations in gaming today might not be new games.
All right, they might be new interpretations of old laws. As always, our focus is on gaming and entertainment, and all these wonderful disclaimers that we always say, but these discussions are educational and analytical and not intended to promote real money gaming.
All right, Tim, let's get into it.
All right. Well, we started this a little bit of time ago, but we'd like to start with a little gratitude and reflection. So before we get into the subject itself, let's talk about something we're grateful for. I'm grateful for innovation. Yeah, not every idea works, but progress often happens because someone is willing to look at a problem differently than everyone else.
Yeah, and my strength has always been curiosity. Some of the most interesting industries and inventions started because someone asked a question. Mine is curiosity. Some of the most interesting industries and inventions started because someone asked a question that sounded strange at the time. What if we did this differently? What if there was another way? That mindset has created everything from airplanes to penicillin. Are you aware of this, the story of how penicillin was created, Tim?
Yes, something with some mold.
Let's talk about this happy life-saving accident. Picture this. It's 1928, and a brilliant, deeply curious bacteriologist, wow, that is not easy to say, named Dr. Alexander Fleming, leaves for vacation. He accidentally leaves a stack of unwashed Petri dishes on his lab bench. Now, lesser minds would have returned, groaned, and thrown away these contaminated dishes straight to the trash. But Fleming was far too bright to do that. Spotting a strange mold that had literally executed a ring of death around a colony of deadly bacteria, his intense curiosity kicked in. Instead of scrubbing the dish, he studied it, discovering that this stray mold was producing a strange substance we now know as penicillin. It's the ultimate reminder that sometimes a messy desk, which I always have, combined with a sharp, inquisitive mind, which that's debatable, can literally change the course of human history. End result, everyone's life is better off.
The moral of the story, have a messy desk and be curious. Interesting. All right. And that's a great setup for today's discussion because we're going to go look at some products that exist because people started asking unusual questions about gambling laws. All right. So I think the next transition about gratitude is kind of maybe a feel-good story. And one of my favorite examples of innovation, curiosity, like you were talking about, innovation as a whole is the Wright brothers. I think everyone knows them in the U.S., but at the beginning of the 20th century, human flight was still viewed by many as pretty much impossible.
Yes. And can you believe Orville and Wilbur Wright, a bunch of bicycle mechanics / manufacturers, believed it could be done? It's like probably back at the time they were probably flat earthers, right, Tim?
Yeah, I think that was a little bit before with Spartacus, right?
Yeah, probably. Hey,
a few years before.
Hey, we can dream. There's no known biography to prove us wrong that Orville and Wilbur believed in a flat earth. Others thought it would take generations to solve this problem.
Yeah, and yet they kept experimenting. They tested designs, gathered data, failed repeatedly, and kept refining their approach, much like Dr. Fleming.
And much like my college experience. But what's fascinating is that they didn't succeed because they had better resources than everyone else. They kept succeeding because they looked at a problem differently.
Yeah, through our framework, the perception was that flight seemed impossible. The probability suggested success was unlikely, and the design was a process of experimentation that eventually made it possible.
And that's exactly what we're going to see today. Nuance, really. And if I can interject here to say nuance is everywhere, while the Wright brothers flew, quote unquote, in 1903, there was a Brazilian, and this is very controversial, named Alberto Santos Dumont. He was another eccentric aviation pioneer. He's celebrated in Brazil as the father of aviation, in that his flight took off all on its own power in 1906 in front of a massive crowd, while the Wright brothers needed some external forces, I think kind of like a catapult type of device or something. And they had just a small handful of spectators. So there's nuance there. People looking at legal definitions, or in the previous case, a technical issue, and asking whether there's another way to build a gaming product.
Yeah, I think we've hit this in the previous episodes, but I think we should start with kind of the basics. And we talked about three kind of key elements that often define gambling.
The legal definition by government is that for it to be gambling or considered gambling, you need a prize, which is something of value. You need a consideration, which is a stake, something you're willing to give up, aka a bet. And there has to be chance. So the outcome is either luck, random chance, like a random number generator, or a draw of some form, like a sweepstakes.
Yeah, exactly. When you put those three together, regulators generally start paying attention when you do that.
Well, what happens if you start modifying just one of those elements? And specifically, we're going to be talking about the chance element.
Yeah, and what if chance element comes from a historical event? What if it's technically a contest?
And what if that contest is a historical outcome that had nothing to do with the game you were playing?
Yeah, and this is where I think things get really, really interesting, unique, and creative, and innovative for that matter. All right, so let's start with a post that we both saw that I believe Valerie crossed, and I think we'll kind of link to it somewhere in here, just so you can see the post, but around historical horse racing. And for sure, it's called HHR, historical horse racing. It is one of the most successful examples of this concept.
So we're just going to call it HHR, like we know everybody, as if everybody knows what we're talking about.
Well, that's why I said it, historical horse racing. Like, I think you've shorted to HHR going forward. As long as you're watching the whole episode, then you'll know what it means.
You know, it's funny when I see anyone named Valerie, I just think of that one song called Valerie. I know that's really not like that insightful, but now it's in my head. It's stuck in my head.
Well, I feel like you should sing it to the whole crowd here.
Valerie. I think it's Steve Winwood. That's going to date me. But anyway, Valerie. Anyway, to most people, getting back on track, to most people, this machine will look remarkably similar to a slot machine. It has the same look and the same feel. And they actually even currently exist in the market today.
Yeah, so the player sees spinning reels, symbols, bonus features, and outcomes that are very familiar. So let's go back to the traditional slot or tried slot. The player presses spin. The RNG, the random number generator, generates a number. The number maps to a real position of the symbols themselves. The reels will animate, and then the outcome will be displayed. This happens in a matter of milliseconds.
What you don't see underneath the hood, that result is actually being derived from a previously run horse race, which sounds fishy.
Yeah, so it doesn't do, the horse race doesn't have the actual RNG in it. But somewhere in the database itself, there's an actual race that has already happened. So we talked about it earlier, but a horse race maybe 20 years ago.
So is that saying, like, if there's like 20 horse races and then you push the slot button and that horse race, it'll pick a horse race of some form and let's say it'll say the number comes out 4 and that horse loses. That's essentially what you're going to see on the screen, correct?
Yeah, we'll map to a number and the number will map to the reels display, which we'll talk about in a second.
So the player then doesn't know which race it is at all. He wouldn't know.
Yeah, exactly. They don't know the horses. They don't know anything out of it. All they see is like a slot machine spinning and then the reels resolving.
Yeah, so they don't know the outcome at all. You know, you would literally need to have some type of mental superpower to memorize every horse race. But even if you did, you wouldn't know because you'd have to somehow be wired into the machine to figure it out. So let's call it HHR style, where a player presses spin, the system then selects a historical race. The race outcome determines the result, and the pay table converts results into credits. So slot reels then animate the outcome. So the end result is basically the same.
It looks exactly the same. It's like a walks like a duck, quack like a duck type of thing. But under the hood, it's a lot different.
Well,
Um,
technically, it wouldn't quack like a duck then.
exactly.
It just
It bark like a spider.
walk like a dog and then bark. Yeah.
But legally, the wager is connected to a real historical horse race rather than a traditional RNG.
That creates kind of a fascinating question. Are you playing a slot machine or are you wagering on a horse race from the past, which I believe is more like of a draw kind of feel, right?
Yeah, I think there's an interesting concept here. But there's another form called NASCAR-powered slot machines.
Do they have a catchy three symbol word?
We can make it up.
In a lot of the news cycles, we're basically seeing discussions around using historical NAS races in a similar way, and of all states, of course, Florida.
Yeah, with Hard Rock in particular. And this concept is remarkably simple. Instead of using horse races, the system uses previous completed NASCAR races as a source of outcome.
So the race again, it's already happened. It's somewhere in the past.
The winner is obviously already known.
If the player doesn't know the result, then there's no way he would be able to memorize it. So it is completely camouflaged in a slot type design.
Yeah, to the player, it's very similar to a slot machine itself.
But again, from the regulatory perspective, the underlying mechanism, the bark, so to speak, is fundamentally different.
So I want to talk about this a second. The reason I think this is somewhat brilliant is because online slot machines, I don't think were approved, but they found a loophole around it by doing NASCAR and showing it in the structure of a slot machine, but it technically isn't a slot machine. So in the case of, let's say, Pennsylvania, the slot tax rate is 54%, online slot tax rate, and the land side or sports betting side is somewhere in like the 19 to 20% range. So because it's a NASCAR event that's driving it, you're taxed at the sports tax rate that you are as a slot tax rate. And slots aren't legal, but it's not a slot machine. It's a NASCAR powered event that you're betting on. That to me is the brilliance of this concept.
It's tax tomfoolery, my friend.
Exactly. But it's still creative nonetheless. And so this is where perception, probability, and design become really useful. Perception, it feels like a slot machine. Probability, the outcome comes from a historical sporting event. And design, the system is intentionally structured on a legal framework.
Yeah, and in fact, the technology isn't even interesting. You could even argue that it's even less technical than a random number generator at this point. And like we said, it's just mathematical subterfuge to kind of trick, the tax man, so to speak. Oh, good. No, I mean, and it's funny too, because it's like in Oregon, for instance, where slot machines are not legal, what they do have is they have video poker, and its video poker is done basically no differently than this. It's based on a lottery type model, which is a draw model, but to the player and to everybody else, it looks just like video poker in every way, shape, and form.
Yep.
Let's go to one of our more creative examples, which is DK Replay, and that stands for DraftKings, not the wide receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Good old DK Metcalf. Shout out to DK Metcalf here. All right. So instead of horse races or NASCAR events like we just talked about, this concept uses historical baseball data.
Yeah. So participants, and this is kind of interesting, especially for you baseball nerds, but you build your lineups and you compete using games that have already happened in the past.
Yeah. So the players don't know which games are going to be used.
The outcomes already exist.
Yeah. Which creates another kind of interesting question, which is this a game of skill?
Is it chance? Is it a fantasy contest?
Or is it something completely, entirely new?
These products keep challenging the categories we've used for decades. You know what's funny about this one, Tim? When I was younger and a baseball dork, I played this game called APBA, which it was a card and had a bunch of numbers, and you had to roll dice to kind of determine how well you did. And you set your lineups, and it could be all these different players from different eras. So you could have basically Ty Cobb. And who's the Dodger who's really famous right now that I can't think of? I want to say Matsui, but that's not his name. Ohtani. So in theory, you could have Babe Ruth, batting ahead of Ohtani in these games. And I think APBA still exists. I think it's more of a digital format, but it's very similar to this. It just kind of reminds me of that.
This episode, you really dated yourself from Kenny Loggins to now this game.
Steve Winwood. Steve Winwood.
Oh, sorry. Okay, maybe it was Kenny Loggins. I think it was someone like that.
If you think I've dated myself, you just wait a little bit.
We're getting old. I think like everyone else, it happens. I feel like there's probably an episode here of like, when was that moment when you're at work or something like that where you were always the youngest one in the room, then all of a sudden you became the oldest one? Like, I don't know if it happened like overnight, but there was a moment when I worked at my last company. We were talking about 9/11, and someone was like, "Yeah, I wasn't even born yet." And that was the moment I was like, "What the?" I was like, "Are you able to drink?" Alcohol? But they are over 21. But I realized, holy crap, 9/11 just didn't seem that long ago, but it was, you know, 25 years ago.
Yeah, you're right. It was literally half our life ago. That's crazy. Anyway, well, now I'm just
Hmm.
sad.
Yeah. By the way, I'm a bicentennial baby. So, like, when the year I was born was 200 years of the country. As we're
Well,
on
they,
July 4th, it just reminded me we have a great episode next week. So make sure you listen to it.
well,
But it
that's
just of like 250. I can't believe it's been like 50 years since then.
well, they made special coins on your birthday.
They did. I think I had this plaque or something like that, like a bicentennial baby plaque or something interesting. But again, now I've dated myself. So
You have.
guilt by association. All right. So let's go back to it. Virtual horse racing is kind of the next thing that we want to talk about, which introduces yet kind of another variation to the mix.
Yeah, this one's really interesting because unlike even historical racing where you're basing the race on something that happened, this race isn't even real.
Yeah, the horses aren't real. The track isn't real. The entire event is computer generated.
Yeah, and yet people still engage. I think the games are called like Zed Run and Zed Champions or something like that, with it in ways that feel remarkably similar to traditional horse racing, right? You're evaluating the posted intrinsic value, aka the performance analytics that you see in front of you, the odds or whatever, and the relative value, the market comparison. So you're basically betting on your data with smarts with a bit of luck in the back end.
Yeah, the Zed Run's interesting. That was around the time of like I almost want to say like NFTs and things like that, which is fascinating. And I know some people tried to get me to see if I wanted to pitch in their horse stall, and buy a whole round of horses they were investing in and stuff like that. And I don't know how well that did, but I guess this whole thing kind of raises maybe a bigger question.
At what point does the underlying event even stop mattering?
Yeah, if the experience itself feels real, does it really matter whether the race actually happened or not? And
I mean,
then
ultimately, all you're really doing is gambling on math, right? At that point.
I think there's a lot of life. I mean, how someone visualizes the maps at the end of the day, and it makes it fun and entertaining, seem to like to gamble, you know, and like to bet on something that these games a chance. Like it gives a little bit of rush. Some people jump out of airplanes. Some people like to gamble.
I mean, there was no better feeling, and I'm a baseball nerd myself here, than when I had my lineup in my APBA league. And when you're rolling dice, you get on a hot streak, right? And back then, if you got like double ones and double sixes, then you get into like the power, you'd actually hit home runs or whatever. But when you were like on a roll, it kind of is amazing how often doubles pops up like you feel it pops up like one after the other. I know mathematically it's not true, but it feels like it is. Like you'll roll double ones, then you roll double threes. It's just interesting.
I wonder if some of that is just we remember the good things and try to not remember the bad things, or at least suppress the bad things. So in the game, you were remembering the doubles and the huge wins or whatever the case may be. Then you were forgetting all those in between things as your memory looks
Yeah.
back on stuff.
Yeah, you don't remember the 34-year-old or your 43. No, of course, you remember the good stuff because I think that's what kind of separates gambling, right? Is like I think people who get more attractive to gambling are the ones who their first experience is a very positive experience to them, meaning they win.
100%. It's always been a trick of trying to make it the first experience or first second experience a really positive experience. I think liking it to restaurants, I might have used this analogy, but I was listening to someone talk about restaurants, and they were talking about how if you can get them back in the door like 3 times, they're going to be basically a customer for life. And that's kind of the whole mantra, I think, with online as well, or any industry, any product. How you get them coming back, at least 3 times and enjoying those first 3 experiences.
It's kind of interesting because when a new restaurant opened up, I always would go at least twice because every time, if you just go once, and maybe it's the math in me that kicks in, You could have a bad experience. You could have a bad meal, the service could suck, whatever. But if you go back a second time and those things like replicate, then yeah, you would never go back. So I think your number of 3 is actually legit.
But I wonder if the first time you had a really good experience and you go back because you had the good experience and then it's a bad experience, then what do you do?
Yeah. Then you're done. I mean, yeah.
If you go third time's a charm, right?
I think you're done. I think it's like, because, again, we're going to date me, but like PF Chang's, like when way back in the 90s when PF Chang's was like growing, if you went to like the PF Chang's during that first like month it opened, it was like fantastic. And you'd go like repeatedly, right? But that's because PF Chang's had like a whole team of like executive chefs that would open and train their staff. So the food was always excellent. And that group of power chefs or whatever you want to call them would move on to a new opening. And so within like 6 weeks, everything kind of just drastically teeters down.
So you almost just want to go to those executive chefs and follow them around to every opening, right?
I mean, when a PF Chang's opened up, it was fantastic. I mean, it was amazing Chinese food.
I wonder if there's a prediction market on that. Similar quality of food or some number of times you need to go to a restaurant, but there's got to be something along those lines, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be something. We could do our own.
Yeah, but speaking of that, let's talk about kind of related to the subject around prediction markets itself.
Because some people are beginning to ask very similar questions and concepts that could eventually be applied here. It's also a very legal hotbed, considering they're taking so much of the wagering from trad sports books at the moment in various venues.
Yeah, so historical races are using past races.
DraftKings Replay, DK Replay, uses historical sports data where percentages are effectively driven by capital buy-in. So for example, in a prediction model, what that means is one person who does that $1,000 buy for a contract in a prediction model is no different than 1,000 people who do a $1 buy-in. And it's not a poll per se, even though I see all the time now on social media, people treat it as a poll, but it's not a poll, but the two get confused.
Yeah, so could future products use historical elections, historical sporting events, historical financial markets?
Historical news events? If the participant doesn't know the outcome, does it even matter if the event even actually occurred? That's where things start to get really interesting.
100%. And I think if we zoom out a little bit on all these products and what they're actually trying to answer, which I think is effectively the same question,
is how can you get to traditional gambling while remaining legally distinct from traditional gambling?
Yeah, and the technology keeps creating new possibilities. AI simulation, synthetic sports.
You got personalized prediction experiences, dynamic event generation. So the line between gambling, gaming, forecasting, and entertainment will continue to blur and mesh.
Yeah, I really think that's the most important question in an entire episode itself.
So what exactly are regulators then actually regulating?
Yeah, are they regulating gambling, randomness, financial risk?
They could be gambling just some form of entertainment, whether it's prediction, information, or a NASCAR-powered slot machine, for instance.
Yeah, it could be a historical baseball contest, a virtual horse race, prediction market. They all seem to orbit around the same idea itself.
So how does this fit into our perception, probability, and design?
Good question. Why don't you tell us?
I feel the perception says that these products that are being offered feel very similar, very real and very similar. The probability says that the underlying mechanism can be very different. Hence, the bark is a little bit different, right? But the design is where the innovation truly happens.
Yeah, and that's the most interesting development. There aren't always new games. There are new ways of packaging uncertainty.
New ways of skirting the tax man as well, apparently.
Yeah, I like the new ways of packaging uncertainty. We should trademark that one, right?
Is there a new way I can kind of skirt the tax man?
I'm sure there's plenty of ways.
It's not income. A lot of people do this if most of your money is basically a capital gain and you, in theory, would be the higher tax bracket. You basically now are at the lower tax bracket. So people are already gaming that system.
Yep. Have it quite well. I have a couple of videos I'll send you on something I was watching this morning on that. All right, but looking ahead, I think one thing we've learned throughout the series is that humans always have been fascinated by uncertainty.
We have ancient civilizations that built games around it. Mathematicians built probabilities around them.
Yeah, and casinos built industries around it, and now technology has created entirely new ways to experience it.
So, a question for the audience is, which of these products do you find the most interesting? Is it historical horse racing, quote unquote HHR, NASCAR powered gaming, DK replay, virtual racing, or prediction markets?
Yeah, and where do you think the line between gambling, gaming, and prediction should be drawn?
Yeah, I mean, where should the regulators step in? We'd love to hear your thoughts.
And as always, thanks for listening. And
Always gamble responsibly. Don't spend more than you can afford, and
believe responsibly.
Believe responsibly.
All right, we'll talk to you next time. Leave us a comment, give us a like.
Bye, everyone.